The place, McNary Dam, giant barrier of concrete and steel spanning the Columbia between Oregon and Washington. Assignment: by means of film, answer this request from Mrs. Diana Lee Orion of El Monte, California. Dear Mr. Smith, every once in a while I see someone on your program with a very strange and interesting occupation, but they all seem to be men. How about showing that women can hold down unusual jobs too? Well, Mrs. Orion, as you know, there are thousands of women engaged in unusual occupations that might provide the answer to your request. But for one of the most unusual of all, may we introduce Mrs. Bernice Huggins of Umatilla, Oregon. Married, age, well, somewhere in the vicinity of 50, Mrs. Huggins, like millions of other working wives, rides the elevator to her job in the morning. But instead of taking her up into the office building, this private elevator takes her down, a tiny solitary figure descending to the bottom of this gargantuan structure. And what could a pleasant, comfortable sort of person like Mrs. Huggins possibly do at the bottom of a huge dam? Why, Mrs. Huggins is a fish counter. That's right, she's a civilian employee of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Her job? Along with her counterpart at the Washington side, she accurately tabulates every fish that moves upstream over the elaborate fish ladders provided for the salmon and other migratory species of the Columbia. Big fish, little fish, rough fish, game fish, fish tagged by the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries, fish injured in their struggle upstream. This bank of counters has a separate place to record them all, and 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, Mrs. Huggins sits in her extremely private office at the water's edge and registers each one as they pass over the counting gate. It's all in a day's work for Mrs. Huggins. And because this gate automatically closes as she leaves for the night, Mrs. Huggins doesn't even have to worry that some over-anxious salmon might slip through without being counted. A woman in an unusual occupation? We submit the name of Mrs. Bernice Huggins, First Lady of McNary Dam and the fish's closest friend. Mrs. Orion, you asked for it.